Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I spent 3 days this week on an annual retreat with one of my professional networks. It's called Rabbis Without Borders. It's not really like Doctors Without Borders. It's a little bit different, and let me explain. The two defining characteristics of the rabbis in this network are that they are pluralistic and that they are innovative. For example, my colleague Rabbi Brent Spodek in Beacon, New York, noticed that while they were building a beautiful sukkah at the synagogue, not very many people were experiencing their Sukkot programming inside the sukkah. So he had an interesting idea, and he started working with the city of Beacon, and they built the sukkah in the town square. And for 8 days, he arranged programming that was pluralistic, because he said, what is the essence of Sukkot? It's to share a message about shelter. And so he spoke to political activists and artists and government officials in the town, and each of them taught a perspective on what does it mean to have shelter. So now the sukkah was full. Torah was being taught by people who weren't Jewish, right? It might not have been the Torah that we find in the scrolls, but the topic of shelter was taught, and it was received by many more Jews and non-Jews than would ever have happened if he'd kept the sukkah at the synagogue. That is what a rabbi without borders does. So we're at this retreat, and each year there are new fellows added to the network, so we needed to do an icebreaker to start because there were new faces. We were all asked to submit an interesting fact about ourselves, and then we had a piece of paper and we walked around the room trying to guess each other's fact. So my fact was that I have been at the starting line of the running of the bulls. And my colleagues, this is something else rabbis with borders are very good at, they challenged my narrative about myself, which is that I'm full of adventure and I like to live on the edge a little bit. And they said, you know, Ilana, it's one thing to be at the starting line, it's another thing to run with the bulls. Very true. And in this week's Parsha, we see Moses' narrative about himself be challenged by Yitro. So when Yitro meets up with Bnei Yisrael and he asks Moses how things are going, Moses has a story he likes to tell about himself. I am a superhuman, and from morning until night, only I can judge the people. And Yitro takes a look at him and says, how's that going for you, Moshe? Not so great, right? In fact, we're told in the text itself that Yitro says, it's wearing you out, Moses, and it's wearing your people out. So I'd like to give you another story, says Yitro. I'd like to show you another way to do this. And I'm wondering how Moshe felt when his father-in-law challenged his narrative. My guess is, like many human beings, he probably felt defensive, embarrassed, angry. I wonder if he was able to move beyond that point. I think the answer is yes, because he ended up adopting some of Yitro's suggestions. And this morning, I'd like us to look at a narrative about Israel. And it might be a bit challenging for our community, so I want you to hold on to how you think Moses might have been feeling when his narrative was challenged in order to keep you present for the words I want to share this morning. But let's build up to this narrative. There's one story that the international media tells about Israel that drives me crazy, which is that Israel is an aggressor and the Palestinians are totally innocent. And I'll give you a perfect example of that kind of narrative. In October this year, there was a headline that said, Israeli police shoot Palestinian man. Here are the facts in the story. A Palestinian man took his car, drove it into a crowded train station, wounded 8 people, and killed a 3-month-old baby, and while fleeing the scene, the Israeli police shot him. So the headline should have read something like, Palestinian man drives car into station. I don't like the narrative that the international press tells about Israel, that Israelis are aggressors and that Palestinians are completely innocent. That is a very frustrating narrative to me. As we're building towards the challenge I want to present this morning, I'll tell you why I feel ready to challenge our community. Part of the story of this community, part of the culture of Beth Torah, is that you're not afraid to push the envelope a little bit. So when this community was founded, there was a narrative in Dallas that there was no conservative community where a woman could have equal access to the liturgical rights of our people. And the founders of Beth Torah said, well, we'd like to change that story. And they created an egalitarian community. And I feel that when you hired me in the spring, that is a continuation of the narrative. When I'm sitting at the monthly meetings with the other rabbis of Dallas, and I'm the only woman in the room who leads her community, I feel the responsibility and the privilege with which you have bestowed me, so thank you. So that's one reason I feel like I can present this challenge. The other is that we've been together for 7 months now, and I have come to trust you. I've come to feel like I can tell you what's really in my heart, and I can trust you to give me fair and honest responses to what I say. And I hope you have come to learn about me that I never intend to lead this community in an autocratic way. And when I put an idea out there, I'm looking for sincere feedback so that we can make a decision together about how to proceed for the health of this community. So with all of that preamble, let me share the narrative that I think we like to tell ourselves about Israel. I think many of us like to say, Israel will never be at peace. And I think some of us would add to that, and that is all the fault of the Palestinian people, because either they are evil or they are weak to allow terrorists to conduct their business in their midst. I think that there are elements of truth in that narrative. I think Israel is still in a stage where it has to fight to defend its borders and its citizens. And I think that we cannot ignore that there are terrorists living among the Palestinian people. But I don't think that's the only narrative about Israel, because every day there are Israelis and Palestinians who, at great personal risk, seek peace with one another, not through force. And I want to share some of those stories this morning. There are a network of schools in Israel called Hand in Hand. I think there are 4 of them now. The vision was that Israelis and Palestinians on a day-to-day basis have almost no interaction with each other. It's very hard if you just want to sit down and have a conversation with someone on the opposite side of the wall. There's not a venue for that. So in these schools, children are taught bilingually in Hebrew and in Arabic, and a core part of the curriculum is to study Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. There is a project called The Greenhouse. It is run by a war veteran, Avital Geva. He fought in '67, he fought in '73. He's become a great conceptual artist, and he sees this greenhouse that he's created on Kibbutz Ein Shemer as part of his art. And Jewish teens and Arab teens come together to cultivate plants, and through this experiment get to know one another and learn lessons in life. And finally, I'd like to share the story of Hanan Schlesinger. He is a member of the Dallas community as well as the community in Alon Shvut in the West Bank. And he happens to be a rabbi without borders. I am going to read the description of his project with his partner in their own words. It's a bit lengthy, but I think everything that they wrote is important for understanding the work that they do. Currently finishing his book, Painful Hope, Ali Abu Awad is today a leading Palestinian activist, teaching his countrymen nonviolent resistance and reaching out to Jewish Israelis at the heart of the conflict. Jailed by Israel during the first Intifada for stone throwing and membership in a terrorist cell, he demanded to see his mother, who was also imprisoned. During the course of a 17-day hunger strike, he learned the tremendous power of nonviolence. Through voracious reading while still in jail, he came under the influence of Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and Mandela. During the second Intifada, Ali was shot by an Israeli in a drive-by shooting. and was evacuated to Saudi Arabia for medical treatment. While in the hospital, he received word that his beloved brother had been shot and killed by an Israeli soldier at a checkpoint. It was in the context of Bereaved Families Forum that brings together people from both sides who have lost loved ones in the conflict that he began to learn how to channel his pain and anger not only into nonviolent resistance, but also into reaching over the chasm that divides between Palestinians and Israelis. Ali has toured the world many times over, telling his riveting story of pain, frustration, bereavement, and personal transformation. Hanan Schlesinger is an Orthodox rabbi and teacher, and a passionate Zionist settler who has been profoundly transformed by his friendship with Ali. His understanding of the reality of the Middle East conflict and of Zionism has been utterly complicated by the parallel universe that Ali has introduced him to. Originally hailing from New York, Rav Hanan made Aliyah on his own at the age of 20 and has lived over the Green Line in Alon Shvut, Gush Etzion, for over 30 years. His family background is Reform, but already at the end of high school he began delving into observant Judaism. He spent over 10 years learning in Israeli Talmudic seminaries and also studied towards an MA in Jewish philosophy at Hebrew University. His professional career has been dedicated to teaching Jewish studies in various colleges and seminaries in the Jerusalem area, as well as in different frameworks in Florida and Texas. It was in Dallas about 7 years ago that he began to become involved in interfaith work, first with Christians and then with Muslims. There he founded Faiths in Conversation, a framework for Jewish, Christian, and Muslim theological dialogue. The mind-expanding experience of these trialogues inspired him to attempt to meet Muslims and Christians back in the Holy Land. Although always drawn to pluralism and deeply empathetic for the other, and sporadically involved in the religious peace movement over the course of the past 3 decades, Rav Hanan never ever met a Palestinian as an equal until he returned from Dallas about a year ago. The meetings that began then have become far more meaningful than he could ever have imagined. Ali and an Israeli partner, Shaul Yudelman, together with Hanan and other Israelis and Palestinians, have been involved for the past 9 months in creating Roots, the Palestinian-Israeli grassroots initiative for understanding nonviolence and transformation on a piece of land owned by the Awad family in the heart of Gush Etzion and abutting the Palestinian town of Beit Umar. This location is one of the rare places that both Palestinians and Israelis can access without special government permits, thus facilitating grassroots, unmediated get-togethers and deep conversations between people from 2 sides. The Palestinians and Israelis involved in this initiative do not hide the many deep disagreements between them. They are deeply aware of the complexities of the conflict and of the lack of equality between the 2 sides. What unites them is their honest search for human understanding and nonviolent resolution of the conflict. So here's where I'm going to be very brave with you. Hanan and Ali came to speak in Dallas in September. And while there were private homes open to them and churches, no Jewish institution created a sanctuary for them to share this part of Israel's story, that there are people seeking peace. They are returning to Dallas in June. And I would like Beth Torah to open our home to them and give them a safe space where they can tell another aspect of the story that is happening right now between Israelis and Palestinians. So I see what I'm saying today as the start of a conversation with you. I really want to know what you think about this, and I think we should start this conversation at the schnapps table right after services. To wind down the sermon, I want to share a story of transformation that I had in the past 2 weeks. Sid and Cliff Friedman are supporters of AIPAC, and they made a generous invitation to me. They asked if I would join them at their table at the dessert fundraiser that AIPAC does in April. And for a variety of reasons, which I'm happy to discuss with you off the pulpit, I said no thank you. I have a narrative that I like to tell about AIPAC. But I went home and I started to think about it, and 2 things occurred to me. One is, I haven't been to an AIPAC event in a really long time. So I think reopening my ears might be a good idea. The other thing is I have met so many of you who I respect so deeply, and AIPAC is important to you, so there must be something there. And in fact, last Friday night, Cliff was escorting me home from Friday night services, and I asked him to tell me more about his love for AIPAC, and he really got me thinking. So thank you. I'm very much looking forward to the dessert reception in a few months. We sing every week, "Oh, say shalom bimroma," right? We ask God to create peace on earth. And I feel that part of the way we can be God's agents on earth is to make sure that one of the narratives that is presented and hopefully becomes the dominant narrative is that there are Israelis and there are Palestinians who want peace. Shabbat Shalom.